For me, my fear is fruit gusher. Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. This is Season 3, and we are excited to have another awesome guest. We have Len. He's on. We're going to talk about this awesome subject today, all about cleaning and prepping fish. And if you're like, oh, that sounds boring, well, guess what? You're wrong, because this is going to be an exciting episode. We're going into how fish are cleaned, all this stuff, what to eat, how to prepare them, why they're delicious, scientifically reasons why, all those good things. The science behind it is because they are. But to start the episode, we're going to have an interesting fishing fact, which I've been told is kind of like it's half merged with a story time. And to handle that is the man with no beard, Jesse.
If you haven't noticed, I did shave off my beard 3 weeks ago. One of us has to have a good looking face. Anyway, I remember a few weeks ago, Andrew, we did it was either an interesting fishing fact or a topic about bad storms. Remember you talked about the great storm of the Great Lakes? Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was in the lore episode.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know what that was. And then I was like, yeah, I don't think I know what that is either. So I actually got curious and I was like, okay, what is the great storm of the Great Lakes? So I thought I would kind of do this like a story time kind of deal. So I didn't know this, but the Great Lakes storm of 1913. So it's been a few years, but it was actually called the White Hurricane. We're going to see why. It's actually pretty terrifying. This is a terrible story. And I feel bad if you're like driving to work on a Monday and you're listening to this, you're like, wow, that was a terrible way to start my day. But anyway, sometimes we have to talk about terrible things. It was a chilly November night in 1913. And all of the ships on the Great Lakes, you have to think these big cargo ships, they were filled up with all kinds of cool stuff. They were ready to go. For everyone that was on those boats, it was just another day. It was cold, but it was just another day. They were used to going out in the cold. But unfortunately, there was a storm a-brewing. And it wasn't just any storm. This was what they ended up later calling the White Hurricane. And it was the worst storm ever to hit the Great Lakes, even up to this day. So why did this storm happen? Well, did you guys ever see that movie? Remember The Perfect Storm?
Yes.
Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Okay, so The Perfect Storm, I don't know if you remember the story of that, but basically one pressure system came and another pressure system came and they both like collided into each other and they created the perfect storm and it was just like insanity and it affected a bunch of fishermen in a boat. This is the Canadian version of that. It is absolutely terrifying. If you ever want to be just freaked out, just look at some of the stuff about this, like some in-depth research. It's crazy. The Great Lakes storm of 1913 happened because 3 weather systems crashed into each other. Not 2, 3. A cold front from the northwest, a warm front from the south, and a low pressure system from the west. And together they created a massive cyclone. Now guess how fast, Andrew, the winds were a-blowing that day. It's pretty fast.
120, 140 kilometers?
145 kilometers an hour. That's about as fast as Andrew drives his work truck on the 401. But that's fast.
Right. About, not, I can't specifically say that I do.
Andrew's boss listens to this podcast, so yeah. Now, those insanely high winds created waves as tall as 35 feet high, which is absolute insanity. Like sometimes I see waves like on a windy day. Like sometimes like you go down to the pier and it's super windy. You see like a wave crash over the pier and you're like, wow, that wave was like 6 feet high. That was crazy. These waves were 35 feet high. On top of that, why did they call it the White Hurricane? Because it was snowing and hailing ice at the same time. So imagine this wind that is 145 kilometers an hour and it's shooting snow and chunks of ice at the boats. Like this is an actual nightmare. So it made basically seeing anything. They said that they couldn't even see in front of their face, like their hand in front of their face. That's how bad it was. Now, back then, you think like meteorologists today, they're okay, but they generally don't know what they're doing. Back then, unfortunately, it was way worse because they didn't have radar and they didn't have satellites at the time. So there was no way of knowing what the heck was going on. Communication was slow and forecasts in the weather, it says they weren't always accurate, but let's just be serious here. They were probably crap. They were absolute crap at the time.
We threw a pine cone in the air, and this time it blew 4 feet, not the average 2.5.
So it said many sailors had no idea that they were heading into such a dangerous storm. So from where they were launching off, it looked not too bad. So they decided to go out, and unfortunately they were met with the white hurricane. Now, this storm actually lasted 3 days. Imagine 145 kilometer-hour winds with hail and snow chunks for
Wow.
3 straight days. And it caused terrible destruction. This is what happened. 12 ships sank, 30 other ships got stranded, and 250 people died. One of the worst stories, like there's a bunch of stories about this. I didn't want to get into them because they're pretty grim, but there was this one ship called the Charles S. Price. It was found days later upside down on Lake Huron, and it took days to figure out which ship it was because it was upside down. They had no idea, and they had no way of flipping it up. So That's crazy. And unfortunately, many sailors actually washed up on shore and all the towns around the Great Lakes, which was devastating, obviously, to not only the families, but to the people that were, taking walks down on the beach. Not that people do that in November, but it happened, unfortunately. What was the good thing about this storm? Nothing, but it did show that humans are very resilient. That's the one good thing about this. So it showed that how brave some people were. Sailors that were thrown into the water, they actually clung to pieces of wood and barrels and other things that had fallen in the water. And some of them actually survived despite the insane wind and snow conditions. Communities worked together to recover parts from the ship, anything they basically could find that had washed up on shore. And the lighthouse keepers stayed at their post 24 hours a day to guide surviving boats back to safety. Now, what did this storm do? It actually made people realize that they needed better safety measures. So after 1913, improvements were made in weather forecasting, ship design, and communication systems, and these changes made sailing on the Great Lakes much safer. So they went from pretty much having nothing, like Andrew said, the old pine cone. And this was really a wake-up call because they lost over 250 sailors, rest their souls. And, the devastation to their families and the community as well. And all these ships that were just lost forever at sea as well. I think that the reason that I wanted to talk about this is not only because me and Andrew were interested about it, but what can we learn from the White Hurricane or the Great Storm of 1913? Well, for one, what?
I know. It proves that Nabogon, the underwater panther or water lynx, does exist, and it caused the Great Storm.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. If you have no idea what that is, I suggest that you listen to our lore episode from last year. It talks all about Andrew's mythical beast that he made up. Well, for one,
I did not make them up.
I forgot. Sorry. Other people made them up in the past. Just kidding. This storm, it teaches us that even as anglers today, if we're fishing on the Great Lakes or other big bodies of water, it teaches us that we do need to respect nature and use technology to prepare ourselves for what's in store. So, for instance, if we are going out fishing in any size of boat, say a canoe, a kayak, a tin boat, a big boat, and you're going out on the lake salmon fishing and you're looking, you have technology to see that there's a storm coming or there's a big wind coming from the south. You know these things. These are things that you can see now. You don't have to use the old pine cone, like Andrew said. We have the technology now to be safe. That is one thing that we can learn from this, is that we have to respect nature and use our technology. Terrible things do happen, but unfortunately, we have to learn from history so that we can improve as a society. And I think that storms like the Great Storm of 1913, the White Hurricane, as terrible as it was, it did help us Canadians be safer by needing to improve. I know the lakes are probably still frozen at this point, but when those lakes thaw finally and you get out in your boat and you see bad weather, just remember the White Hurricane.
Well, there's sometimes I'm happy about climate change because I haven't seen a storm like that and I don't want to. I don't want to experience that.
They said there hadn't been a storm like that since. So well over 100 years, 110 years.
That's crazy.
So, yeah.
You know what that means? We're past due, boys. Terrifying. Well, thanks for now making me fearful of going out in the water even when it looks calm. Thanks. I'll still do it. I'm sure we all will. But now we're going to move on to our main topic. We're going to first let Len give a chance to introduce himself. We got him on the podcast. Now, you may know him from some of his social media videos and stuff like that about, cleaning and preparing different fish, or some of his other expeditions that he's done. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, though, Len?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me today. You can find me on Instagram at Len Tal Outdoors. I'm a millwright by trade, and if I'm not at the mine, I'm usually trying to fish in some lake around my house. So that's mostly about me, and thanks for having me.
No problem. Now, like, I've seen some of your videos, and you put my cleaning to shame because, like, you're pretty quick with that knife. So, how long have you been cleaning your own fish? Again, like, I don't know if there's actual professional fish fillet tournaments, but
There is. I have seen them online, and I'm not as fast as those guys.
Well,
They're like
I'm
2
not as fast
seconds.
as Usain Bolt either, but I like the odd sprint.
They're like seconds to clean a walleye. It's ridiculous. I don't know. I just think I've always been like the clean guy, the fish cleaning guy in our group of friends. So I think I've cleaned my fair share.
I know the pain.
Practice over time. So
that's Andrew in our group.
Yeah, there's always that. Someone's got to be that guy. I'd rather be that guy than the guy who has to clean up after all the cooking and everything. I'll do all the cooking. I'm not doing any of the cleaning.
Yeah, Jesse usually does the cleaning too, so that's fair.
It's a fair trade.
It's a good trade. I don't know. I've been doing it for I don't know, since I was young. I've always been the fish guy. So
I remember being excited when I was a kid watching like my dad teaching us. Now I will say I use a very different cleaning and filleting method than my dad showed me. It was something that he kind of like came up with on his own, but I've become much quicker than than that method growing up, which is one of the things, it's good to talk about this stuff because there's always ways to improve or tips that you haven't seen. And I love watching videos on it because that's how I learned how to fillet pike way better. That's one of the things you're going to get into as well. But I remember like as a kid, I thought it was cool to, gut the fish. I was like, I guess that makes me a little bit morbid and creepy, but I don't know. As an outdoorsman, you got to get used to doing that. If you're going to eat the fish, you have to be able to prepare it.
It's part of the game.
Yeah. Nowadays, I don't enjoy that part. I like the eating part more and the catching part more.
I actually don't mind it. It's kind of therapeutic now. No one bugs you. You just go off in the corner in the fish clean shack and you just clean your fish. And you're like, oh yeah, he's just doing his thing. So
come out fine. Covered in blood, splattered. You're like, what a relaxing afternoon, boys.
I think I've gotten much cleaner now. I usually don't get dirty at all.
Yeah, it's another good thing to strive for, that's for sure. We're going to go just kind of quickly into some of the tools of the trade. Speaking of fillet knives, I know there's a different variety, but usually it's like to each their own what they prefer, right? More flexible blade or skinny blade or thick blade. But what are some things that you would recommend people look at when choosing a fillet knife?
Yeah, to each his own. I like a long, thin blade. I actually have a little example. This is the one I've been using for about 10 years, and it is pretty flexible there. But everyone has their personal preference. I like a longer blade so you can get through the entire fish in case you do catch an actual big one that you are keeping, like a salmon or a bigger trout. But really, it's to each his own. I've just gotten used to this one. So I know it was about $30 on sale for 10, and it's been the best knife that I've had since. Just you want good quality steel is what you're really looking for, and a good non-slip handle.
I know, like you were saying, depending what you're filleting, I know for me, I do like a flexible blade. I don't like a really, really stiff one. But at the same time, I have used some of the Ultra Flex, and I can't get good fillets with it. It is
I like right in the middle. Right in the middle is probably the best and easiest for beginners as well.
And usually, like, I don't know about yourself, but I don't like a 6-inch blade is
not enough.
No, it's too short. 8 inches is where it's at.
Yeah, I think this is 8 or 9. I would say just if you're like wary about doing it as a beginner, you're gonna hack up your first 100 of them before you get good. So just
keep some Band-Aids handy.
Yeah, just try and salvage what you can and like use the resource and make do with what you can. But you're gonna mess up a bunch of them before you get good at it.
Yeah. And do you think that I know you said that knife is a good deal that you got it on, and you've obviously loved it for years. Is there value in going in like a really expensive fillet knife, do you think?
I mean, as much as you want to spend, obviously, probably the higher price, the better the quality steel, and it will hold an edge longer. You won't have to sharpen it as often. This one seems to hold good for about 10 walleyes, and then I got to sharpen again. So that's usually enough.
Actually, just because we're talking about sharpening, what do you do to keep your knives sharp? Like, how do you sharpen them? Is there any like maintenance you do between fish?
Between fish, you should be washing every time, get the scales off, get dirt off or whatever. It's mostly the scales. The scales will dull it like you wouldn't believe, especially off like a pike or something like that where the scales are really hard. But there's tons of sharpeners styles. Like this is one that you pull through, or you see a lot of people have those little plastic ones with a little X. Like they come with every Rapala knife. Mm-hmm. Those are great just to like throw in your boat or in your bag. And these are the ones I love the most. These little Speedy Sharps, you get them at Canadian Tire. They go on sale for like $10. and they actually peel like the steel off, and then you hone it, and you can get a really, really sharp edge on any knife. It's also good for scissors, and like you can sharpen up your vice grips and stuff too with them.
That's cool. I know I have one of the old tackle boxes I acquired. It came with this big like knife sharpening kit. It had a couple ceramic rods in there. And in the instructions, I didn't realize, because I have one of those cheap Rapala, things, came with a little sharpener.
Yeah, everybody has one.
And it doesn't sharpen anymore. And then with these instructions on this ceramic thing, it said on this other blade sharpener, it said that when you see the steel when it's no longer white, you have to wash it. Just a mild soap. And you can wash the ceramic off, and then it opens up the pores again, so it actually starts to sharpen again. So even on the sharpener with that, I only recently discovered I have to clean that so it keeps sharpening well.
Yeah, I didn't even know that either, because I never used those ones, but that's a good point.
I got to look into that other one you get there.
The Speedy Sharps, the Canadian Tire, they go on sale for I have so many of them because they're so easy to lose. But yeah, they go on sale for about $10.
That's awesome. Scalers, what do you think about like a fish scaler? Have you used them, or do you like them?
I do use them, especially if you're doing a skin-on method, if I'm trying to be fancier with a skin-on type of meal. I do like eating the skin myself. I do have an example. This is the one I use. Got it on Amazon for about $20, not even, I think. So something like this is small, compact, and you can keep it with you if you're scaling fish, if you're doing that. I like to do it. I think it helps with the taste in cleaning the fish and cleaning the scales and getting all the dirt and crap off that they might have like carrying on them. And usually work it from the tail to the head. Obviously the scales are going back, so work it off in lots of water. I kind of do it, the fish semi-submerged in water, and it just kind of cleans as you go, and it's really easy to use.
And for anyone who doesn't know what a fish scaler is, it's kind of like if you pictured like a dirt bike cleat, like a heavy duty bicycle, pedal or something, or even just if you're like me, maybe you had an old Victorinox knife and you'd fold out that really dull saw and think, who's going to use this to saw stuff? This is stupid. That's not a saw. That's a descaler. So yeah, if you're, low on the brain cells like I am some days, you can pretty much use anything that is kind of like dull and saw-like as a descaler.
Yeah, pretty much. You can use the back of your knife to flip your fillet knife around. Just use that. Yeah. Really, anything with a good solid edge, it's going to take them off. The scales aren't on there very hard, I guess, or it's pretty easy to take them off once you get going. I'm
surprised because you go against the grain with it, and they start popping off. So it can be messy. So just be prepared for that if you're indoors.
Yes, don't do it indoors. Don't do it indoors.
Better tip, don't do it indoors at all.
Yeah, do it in a bucket or at the lake, like on the shore or something where there's lots of water available.
Andrew knows that from experience. Remember that time your dad found one perch scale underneath the fridge?
Yep.
I was not fillet the fish in the house, but it was like -30 outside. Yeah. And Andrew's like, well, just do it and clean up really good. And we thought we cleaned up so good. And his dad came home, he's looking around. He finds this one scale on the floor. And he's like, what did you guys do?
Oh, I was in so much trouble for that.
I wasn't.
We cleaned up. It was just like one. It was nothing.
I know.
Oh, well.
What an idiot.
Love you, Dad. When it comes to cleaning the fish, do you bleed your fish? And what method, if you do, what method do you use?
I do recommend doing it. It will make the flesh taste a lot better. It'll get rid of the gamey taste, so-called, as people like to say. It just ensures your fish will stay fresh as well. There's two kinds. Like you can do gill popping, which is just sticking your finger in there and ripping them. I usually do that on like brook trout, whitefish, smaller fish. And on bigger fish, you can actually just cut one of the gills, cut one or two with a knife or a pair of scissors or something. And then I put them back in the live well. It seems cruel, but they're still alive. But you want them to stay alive so the heart keeps pumping the blood out. And it will make a mess in your live well. Don't get me wrong, but the fish will be much better, in my opinion.
We've recently started doing that ourselves. And for the past few years now, we have been. Yeah, I was surprised at the difference that it made. The bloodline inside is on that fillet, like that you see underneath the spine, is almost non-existent when you can properly bleed a fish, and it does make the cleaning process. Your cutting board's not covered in blood when you're trying to do it, because you don't want that in your meat at all.
That makes a big difference when on the cutting board for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. I think it's important. It's just like hunting. You know, if someone is squeamish, maybe you don't keep fish at all. That's fine. Sometimes you can even like knock them out. They're still alive, but you can still pop the gills at that point too. And that way they're at least like unconscious while still their heart's still going. So again, if you are conscious of that, but again, the purpose is to eat these fish as well.
Also, just to add, remember that guy we went fishing with in the spring for walleye?
Yeah.
The way that he did it is we were fishing for walleye. He would grab them. He had this little pair of scissors, and he would just like open the walleye's gill open. He'd cut like between both the gills and the little section of flesh.
Yep.
Yeah,
There's like one main
open.
vein there, and he cuts that, and it was just like gone. Like literally within seconds, you see. Fish don't have a lot of blood in them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a lot of time for that to come out. And yeah, he chucked them in the live well, and then when we filleted those things, they were just like pure white. It was amazing. But
the walleyes will come out crystal clear. Same with pike, snow white.
And you know what? I'm going to do some research because just so that I can have some actual articles behind me when I say things like this. But I'm not going to get into it. But fish nervous systems are not the same as our nervous system. So I'll get into more detail on another podcast and maybe an interesting fishing fact or something. But just keep that in mind too. We're not talking about humans here. Anyways, moving on to those delicious fish. Northern pike, the Y bone, the bane of all fillet people.
So yeah, there's a couple ways to do it. Some people do the 5 fillet method, where you take off the back, the tail, and then cut down the side. I find that hard unless it's like a big enough pike. I like to just knock the shoulders off. Just do the same thing, cut the fillet right off the side, and then you can use your knife and follow the Y bone on both sides and just take it out as a strip. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the easiest way. The other thing is just keeping a pike that's big enough to do that. The smaller the pike, the smaller the bones. So I try not to keep pike that are like 6-7 pounds around. Nothing smaller. It makes it so much harder to get the Y bone out cleanly.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'd follow the same fillet method now with taking that one strip out the side, and you can end up when you take your time with it. That's one thing I will say. Exercise a lot of patience when you're doing a pike. You will be rewarded with, if you do it right, with a beautiful like 20-inch slab, like boneless fillet.
There is a ton of meat on a pike.
Amazing. Yeah. I would rather keep one decent sized pike than a whole bunch of walleye or bass. Like, one, they taste better than bass. 2, they taste as good as walleye, in my opinion. And you can do so much. You can have this huge fillet. You can cook it however you wanted. They're great in chowder. But I cut that, once that full fillet is done, I just cut into strips and just make fish fingers with it and fry it up. It's delicious.
Perfect. That sounds good.
Going to bone structures again, with trout and salmon, what is something that you would recommend for filleting? Like, what's your process for filleting those? Because that's kind of like the thing where they might do a charter fishing trip or something like that. That's what they want to take home, is a nice salmon fillet or something.
For sure. I do the cut down the back and then like follow the ribs and then right down to the tail. So you're left with a huge fillet, but that Y bone section is still in there. And then what I'll usually do is just run my knife along it so they all kind of stand up out of the meat a bit. And then I have little tweezers, fish tweezers, because the one time I used my wife's and she was not happy about that. So I had to get my own. She was not into that. But they're, especially on salmon, all the salmon down there are huge. The Y bones stick out fairly a lot. Like they're sizable to grab, and you just go down, take your time, and you can pluck each one of them out, and you don't lose any meat like you would on the pike, taking out that strip, and you have a beautiful fillet that looks like it's from the store, right?
And for anyone who's thinking of, how do I know if I got all the pin bones and stuff off the side of it? So with pike, they're a Y shape, so it's attached to that rib in 2 spots. Then it goes, down to one bone at the end. But these pin bones and stuff off salmon and trout, it's just one. There's the ribs that come down and then kind of one bone that comes off the side. If you wanted to, you can just count how many ribs are on that fillet, and then how many pin bones you're supposed to pull out of it once it's off. So if you wanted to ensure 100% there are no bones in here, because you don't want to have unfortunate Aunt Gladys choke on that one bone you left in that fillet at dinner, that is a surefire way to make sure you're getting them all out, is all of those bones are growing off of the ribs themselves.
Who's Aunt Gladys?
I'm sure someone out there got really creeped out, but like, how did you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, touch on these. These are $10 on Amazon. Save yourself from getting in the doghouse and get yourself a pair.
That's good, because like one time I didn't have the tweezers, and I was trying to use like needle nose pliers. Just an absolute nightmare. So spend the $10 and do it the right way.
It makes much more of a mess, like poking the holes trying to get them, and then you're left with a big gouge in your fillet, which is not great for presentation.
And you were saying too to get the bones to stand up. So once you cut it off the ribs, how do you said you run your knife backwards against the fillet?
Yeah, I'll just turn it over again just with the back edge, and just like you'll hear them go, like you'll hear them all hitting the back of the knife, and they'll just poke out of the meat just enough so you can grab them with the tweezers. I kind of put a finger behind and go slowly and just pluck them all out. They come out easy. Give them a little jerk and they come right out.
You know what? I just realized this is a great thing to do with your significant other, with your girlfriend or whatever, where instead of her popping the pimples in your back, you're like, hey, have some tweezers, I'll fillet it off the fish, and you just can pick out all the little bones. Maybe it's therapeutic. Maybe they'll like it. I don't know. They probably won't. Don't try it.
Try it and let us know how it works. Blame Andrew for this. I had nothing to do with
it. Going kind of the last step with kind of the gory side of things of cleaning and preparing these fish. Like, where do you do it? Do you normally have it at a table? Like, I've done it in a pinch, like squatting on the side of a rock and stuff like that. But what is ideally, what do you want accessible when you are filleting a fish?
If you're going back home, you should set yourself up with a nice little station. I have one on the side of my garage. Like, I built a custom table up high, so you're working up here, not bending over a table. At the end of cleaning 100 fish, your back is sore already from catching all those fish. So proper height on your table. I mean, if you've seen any of my videos, I'm usually out in the bush, so I'm doing the same thing, squatting over the flattest rock I can find, trying to keep the fillet like out of the dirt. But set yourself up if you're going to do it. Like, I have a big Teflon cutting board right beside the table, on the table, a small squeegee. I have a hose right there, plug in, sink. Make sure you have a good like bleach solution to clean everything, so it doesn't stink up the place and you have like raccoons and stuff coming around after for the extra little pieces.
And just a quick question for you. I know everywhere has different rules for what you can throw out, but it's a random question. When you are at home, how do you dispose of all the guts and all the trimmings and stuff like that? Is there a clean way that you've found to get rid of it? Because I know even me, like we don't own the house, we just rent in a house. But, like, if I fish on the wrong day and I keep a fish on the wrong day, it's 2 weeks before next garbage day.
Yeah, I feel you there. Hopefully it is close to garbage day and then you can just chuck them out. But I will probably shouldn't even say this, but I'll throw them all in a bag and then I bring them to work and throw them in a dumpster there.
That's a good tip. I'll be honest, I do that too.
Yeah, find a random dumpster, chuck it in
there. One thing I have done actually is I just shove it all. Like I use newspaper underneath as like a temporary tablecloth, and then I'll just wrap it up in a tight ball and shove it in a freezer bag and just freeze it until I can. At least it won't rot or stink. Next garbage day, if I remember, I free up space for the French fries to go back in. Before we move on to our next section, which is all about getting ready to cook it. Speaking of cooking things up for you, Jesse has worked to get an awesome giveaway. Now, this is going to be one of multiple, but why don't you give us more details about the giveaway this week, Jesse?
All right, so we actually have a special guest right now that we're going to talk to. So listen to this. This is a special segment that we're going to actually have, and it's going to be all about our CanCast countdown. I thought we could have in the next few weeks, well, we're going to talk to a bunch of different people. We're going to talk to a vendor. We're going to talk to someone from the tackle swap. And we're going to talk to some just regular people like me, like customers that go into CanCast. And if you didn't know, CanCast is Canada's biggest fishing show. It is absolute insanity. We love it. We always talk about it, but don't take just our word for it. We're going to talk to these people, and especially Wes from Wham Baits, because he's a gold member. He's a huge CanCast guy too. He's going to tell you his experience so that if we haven't convinced you over the last 2 or 3 years to go to CanCast, Wes is going to convince you. So, hey, Wes, how's it going?
It's going average.
That sounds terrible.
It can't be terrible. It's just average.
Okay. You know what? For this podcast, I'll take that. So
all right.
I thought since you're a huge CanCast guy, you're a vendor at CanCast. If you didn't know who Wham Baits is, you probably haven't listened to this podcast, but Wham Baits makes a lot of awesome plastic baits that we all love. High quality stuff. He is a vendor at CanCast the last 2 years and this coming year. So why don't you tell us about your CanCast experience?
My CanCast experience, the first thing that jumps out at me, and it was readily obvious from the first minute of day one, it's the fishing vibe, right? It's something that you can't really explain. You have to be there. You have to feel it. There's this palpable excitement and buzz in the buildings and throughout the crowd. This whole show is about fishing, right? There's no other booth there. There's no life insurance. There's no pet food. There's no one selling slippers. Everyone that sets up there and that attends is all about the fishing. It doesn't matter if you're a competitive tournament level angler or if you're just getting out once a month. Everybody that goes there is all about the fishing. That's the most important thing that really jumped out at me. The second thing is just connecting with people, with customers and supporters or other vendors or other retailers that are there. With the number of people that come through the show, there's no better place or time to connect with them, talk to customers, get feedback from them on the products, hear their success stories or just catch up a bit. So that was, I mean, you saw it when we were there. The whole booth was busy all day. And it was people coming from, all over the place, coming to chat, hang out, buy some baits, or just catch up. The other thing is the social on the Saturday night is a great place to just hang out with other showgoers or vendors in a casual hangout setting, grab a drink, grab some food, and just chat with whoever's there. And that's a great way to just really connect with the other people that are at the show or involved with the show. The other thing is getting your product seen. There was a paid attendance of over 5,400 people last year at 2024's CanCast. There is no other one-day fishing show in Canada that gets that many eyeballs on your product or service. There's tons of local shows in community centers, Legion Halls, stuff like that, and those are awesome. Those are great shows, and they're the backbone of the grassroots fishing in Ontario and in Canada. But you get 200, 300 people out to those shows, right? Some of them are just there to pass time in an afternoon or kick tires or just look for deals on used gear. But CanCast has a completely different environment, different atmosphere. There's 5,400 people, like I said, last year. There's going to be even more this year, and no other one-day show in Canada gets that many people through the doors. So if you have a quality product or service, you can count on people coming up to you all day, asking about it, buying it, asking questions about it. And you might think like, hey, I'm not big enough, or I don't have a big enough following to set up at a show that big. And that's what I thought my first year. I hadn't been doing this that long, but I knew I had a quality product, and it was just a matter of getting it in front of people. My first display was so janky, like it was terrible. And I'll admit to that. I wasn't prepared. I had pegboards zip tied to, coat hangers, and it was held together by bubble gum and Band-Aids. But, it was a great way to connect with people, like I said, and talk to people and get product in front of people's faces and, build relationships. And it turned out that, those relationships turned into lifelong customers, and honestly, people that turned into friends. It's a great way to just connect with so many people in different walks of life.
Yeah. And like you said, if you have a product that's good quality, you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on it, which is fantastic. Probably one of the best opportunities in Canada for people to see your stuff.
Absolutely.
Like fishing.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, at this time, likely you'd have to ask Kyle Carruthers, the guy who runs CanCast. They're probably full by now. So if you're a vendor, I would reach out to Kyle. But if he's full, definitely make plans to be in CanCast 2026 because it fills up fast, doesn't it, Wes?
It does. And if you're a vendor, if it's full right now, talk to Kyle and pre-register for 2026.
Yeah. So that's great perspective from someone who is a vendor. Unfortunately, Wes is at his booth the whole time pretty much. So next week, we're going to talk to someone that actually gets to walk around. So unfortunately, that's the bad thing about being a vendor at CanCast. You don't get to look at all the stuff like me and Andrew do, but that's okay. So thanks, Wes, for that. And another thing we'd like to add about this is it is the countdown to CanCast. And the next few episodes are actually going to be giving away some CanCast tickets. So this week, we're actually going to be giving away a pair. So 2 tickets for CanCast, and they're going to be mailed to you. So Andrew is going to go onto the Patreon. That's the only way to win is being a supporting Patreon member. We're going to do the draw. You're automatically entered if you're a Patreon member. We're going to mail those tickets to you. And if you already have CanCast tickets, that's totally fine. You can give them to some of your buddies. Maybe some of your buddies that don't even fish. That's fine. Give them the tickets. Maybe they'll start fishing with you too. So you can win 2 tickets and 2 new fishing buddies. It's great. You get them addicted to spending money, and make sure they go to the Wham Baits booth, of course, to pick up some
Absolutely
pretty nice Wham Baits. Hear this? That's the Wham Baits package on the microphone. So good. So anyway, thanks, Wes. And just as a teaser, we're going to have Wham Baits on as a sponsored episode in the next few weeks before CanCast. And I heard that his giveaway for that episode is pretty juicy.
There's going to be a full box of juice.
But literally baits, though, like not juice, okay? The fruit flies are terrible. So anyway, thanks, Wes. We'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Sounds good.
How awesome was that?
Wes is such a character. I love that guy.
Yeah, love that guy. Anyway, so as we mentioned, we're giving away 2 CanCast tickets this episode. Andrew is going to go on Patreon on Friday. So if you're listening to this on Sunday or Monday, this Friday coming up, he's going to pick the winner of those 2 tickets. And just as a bit of a spoiler, we're going to be giving away tickets every episode until CanCast. So stay tuned. Buy your tickets, but if you win, give those tickets to your buddies that don't have tickets. So anyway, we'd like to thank the CanCast team for sending out some tickets for us. And again, all Patreon members are automatically entered into the giveaway to win these tickets. So thanks again, Wes. He said, yeah, he's good. Anyway, back to the main topic.
So talking about back to fish, eating fish now. This is now getting to be the funner part. We're now moved away from our table that we have at a proper height with our sharp knives that are put away. They've been cleaned, resharpened before put away, so they're ready to go for next time. And now we have to start cooking it. We can't eat it yet because, bacteria and organisms exist that will absolutely wreck our internal system. So we have to cook it. We're first going to talk like different things. What are some of your favorite ways to prepare fish, Len?
Favorite ways? I love, obviously, the classic beer batter walleye. There's nothing better than that. That's just spring. It's just fishing to me. Like the start of the fishing season was usually May long around here. And you go hammer walleye and you just have a big fish fry with the boys. And there's just nothing better than that.
I agree. I love beer batter. It's so good.
Can never go wrong.
Beer batter makes bass taste good.
The beer batter itself is amazing. The fish, I don't care what it is underneath. It could be goldfish for all I care.
Koi fish.
Yeah, sure.
I'll eat anything once. Now, there's a couple different things that we had talked kind of previously a little bit about, but patting fish dry. Why is it important to do so when you're, it's all filleted, you can't just drop it in the pan sopping wet. Why should we pat it dry?
It's going to help cook your fish better. You want to get all that extra moisture off of the fish. It's going to help you get a really good texture and sear before you cook it. It's going to help your seasonings penetrate better. If you just put salt and pepper on a wet fillet, it's just kind of going to run off. It's also going to help your flour, your eggs, your beer batter, your delicious beer batter stick better. It's going to help it from sticking to your pan or anything. So I always pat my fish dry. The way to do it. You guys should start practicing that as well. It's going to help you a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And for seasonings, what are some that you like to use? For let's say, like you can even mention specific species, like certain ones with more or whatnot. But what are some of those that you like to use on a regular basis?
For like your white flesh fish, I usually go really, really simple. Good quality salt, pepper, and a lot of butter. Butter will make everything better, so it doesn't matter what you put on it. As long as it has lots of butter, you should be fine. And something like a trout or something like dill, lemon, garlic. I like to keep it really simple and I'm there to eat the fish, not a bunch of seasonings. So
I know one thing I really like is chili powder or a bit of paprika.
Yeah,
can really
blackened.
Help. Yeah, and that can be really good on a non-battered fillet. Just a little bit of that stuff. A bit of salt and pepper fried in butter with some garlic or onions in the pan. That is delicious.
Yeah, good old blackened walleye.
Delicious. Oh, I love it on perch too. Paprika is really good on perch, I find. Now, for rinsing fish, you had mentioned that when we talked earlier that rinsing fish is not ideal. Now, as someone who regularly does this, I'm very curious as to find out more information why.
I think it's okay if you're rinsing it in the lake or something like that. But when you're rinsing it in your kitchen, you're just splattering all of the bacteria that's on the fish all over your utensils, your sink, your cutting surfaces. And it's really not recommended because you're going to get cross-contamination potentially, and that's the last thing you want when doing that. So try and keep it to a minimum and pat your fish dry instead of rinsing all the stuff off. Try and remove it with a towel or something, a wet towel.
Very good. That makes a lot of sense. I know even when I am doing like a beer batter or just a basic, simple flour batter, I had seen enough of like the Gordon Ramsay videos of like you have a wet hand, you have a dry hand when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And just keep the system going so that you're not crossing between dishes, because one, your fingers don't get caked with gummy, batter, but it does help as well with keeping, even barbecuing and stuff like that. Anytime you're handling meat, even filleting the fish, I like to keep one hand of the knife, and I make it a rule of thumb, I never put that knife down, so I know I have a clean hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's also going to affect shelf life if you're keeping it. You're removing the natural enzymes off the fish by rinsing it, taking that slime off. So that's going to make it spoil faster if you're saving it for later. So just try your best not to do that. And if you do rinse it, pat it down, and then you have to disinfect your surfaces that have been contaminated.
These are good tips, because these are things that, say you're a guy like me who only keeps fish like 2 or 3 times a year. These may be things that you don't really think about. You're like, oh, I'll just rinse it in the sink quick, and I'm not going to pat it dry. I'll just throw it in that. That's things that you may not think about. So these are great tips, right? Like we always say, you can learn from anyone. We're learning from Len. He's pretty good, but you can learn from anyone,
Sure.
even little things that you haven't thought of. You're like, well, why haven't I been doing that? And guess what? You don't have to admit to other people that you have been doing it the wrong way. See, me and Andrew are just like, yeah, we've never done that. But guess what? I guarantee we do some of these things. We're just average guys. What can I say?
Yeah, me too. Don't worry about it. If I'm storing fish, I will wet it. Like in a Ziploc bag, I'll fill the bag with water and then freeze it like that. Because when you go to thaw it out, you're just going to protect you from oxygen in your freezer. You're not going to get freezer burn. And when you go to thaw it out, your fillets the natural water in the fillets won't leak out, and you see them get cracked and dry kind of if they're not. So I always freeze all my fish in a bag of water. So then when it does thaw out, it's kind of still, it goes against kind of that, but I'll pat them all dry after, take them out, let them thaw, and then pat them all dry, and then you're ready to go. And they won't break apart in the thawing process. That's
a good point, because unless you have access to a vacuum sealer, freezer burn happens really quickly on fish. Like, I don't store it often. I pretty much only keep a fish when I can eat it in the next couple of days. Plus, I don't have a large freezer to stock, so I have the top quarter of a refrigerator freezer that I get to use. So, but yeah, I like that, because then you're preventing the oxygen from hitting the actual fish as it's frozen in a block of ice.
Yeah, I've kept fish like that for over a year, and then you thaw it out, and you would never be able to tell that the fish was from the bottom of your freezer and you forgot about it, but it's still good to eat.
Yeah, that is an awesome tip. That people got to take that one home. That's a good tip. That's what we're here for.
All right, end the episode. Just kidding.
We're not going to get any better than that, folks.
I'm out of good tips. That's it.
Now, one last thing we're going to talk about before going on to the actual, it's now in the pan. Soaking the fish beforehand. Now, not for freezing, but for prepping the fish, doing like milk or vinegar. When would you use something like this, and what's the benefit of doing so?
Getting rid of the gamey taste that people say. I never really do any of this, soaking in milk. We never really have that much milk in our fridge anyway, or vinegar, but people who don't like the fishy taste or the fishy smell, this could help with that and help them get into eating more fish. And I actually looked it up so that we have the actual scientific breakdown of it. The seafood contains an odorless compound called, I'll try and pronounce this, trimethylamine oxide when it's alive, but it breaks down into trimethylamine after the fish is killed, which is what causes the fishy smell. So the casein in the milk binds to the TMA, removing the odor when the milk is drained after it's sat in there for about 30 minutes to 4 hours.
That's cool. I want to try that now. As a Canadian, I obviously have bags of milk sitting in my freezer or sitting in my fridge that I can break out and put fish in.
Yeah.
That's funny, because I remember watching, it was just like a YouTube clip or something from someone fishing in the States or saltwater or something, and they were catching this fish. I think it was like bluefish, and they're not a popular fish to eat because they're really strong and gamey. And the guy basically said the same thing, that they would get these fish, they'd flay them up, soak it in milk overnight, and then it removed a lot of the gaminess. So it's obviously something that people do. I've never tried it myself, but maybe we should do that, Andrew. Catch yourself a really gamey carp.
Yeah, I was going to say, we should try it with carp and see if it helps. I'm willing to try that again.
That'd be a good one to try.
Okay, we're gonna make Andrew do that. That's his homework for next. Well, not next episode because it'll still be wintertime, but.
And then I think the same goes for the vinegar. It's like the acid in the vinegar is neutralizing the smell and the taste, the enzymes. So it's about the same thing with vinegar. Depends which way you want to do it. I mean, like I said, I've never done it. I'm eating fish to taste the fish, so it's not a problem for me, but I can see how it is for some people.
Now, as it comes to, again, further down the process of it's almost on our plate, like cooking fish whole, that's not something I do a lot of just because I'm not trying to impress Jesse when we're camping backcountry. Like, he can deal with just a beer battered fillet, and that's fine.
I prefer it, actually, than seeing two eyes looking up at me as I'm trying to eat it.
What are some, perhaps advantages to having a whole fish cooked? Are there times that you do it, and why?
Cooking whole fish, I usually do this type of presentation with smaller fish like brookies, small trout, rainbows. Anything that's too small, for if you're going to start hacking into the fillet, you're going to lose a lot of meat. So you can just cook some of these smaller fish whole and peel the skin off and just pull the flesh off the bones. The skeletal structure is going to stay intact, and you can just maximize the amount of meat that you're getting off something like a couple of small brookies and feed a couple of guys with them instead of wasting meat hacking them up.
I know Jesse and I, we've done that a few times with we call them pan fryers, right? When you catch a small trout, they're like 8-9 inches long, whatever, and yeah, you just fry them up. They're delicious. I've done it with creek chub too, which is actually
really
creek chub, yeah, horny head chub, delicious, absolutely delicious. They're similar to catfish, very oily meat. Even in the skin will peel off like a catfish too. And yeah, honestly, if you have a chance, try some creek chub like pan fryers. So good.
You bring me to your creek chub spot and we'll do a creek chub catch and cook. Say that fast a couple of times.
Creek chub catch and... Yeah, I can't.
It's impossible.
Stuff.
I was trying to do it smoothly and I just kept getting caught.
Speaking of like cooking fish whole, so I grew up, my dad took me trout fishing since I could walk. So we used to fish these little creeks.
That's right, since Jesse was 9 years old.
Yeah. But we used to keep little browns and rainbows and brookies, maybe 12, 14 inches was a big one, right? And yeah, we do the same thing. We'd actually cut the head off, but we'd cut the head off. And I remember I was too young to use a knife. So my dad would be like, he taught me how to clean them with scissors. So you'd cut through the belly, you'd open them up, you'd clean all the stuff out, and you'd fry them just like whole with the fins and everything on. The fins would get all crispy. We eat the fins. Yep,
fin chips.
Delicious. And the skin, the scales are so small in these little trout. You just eat the skin. It was all crispy, super good. And then when you'd peel the meat off the first side, you'd just be able to grab the bone, like the spine, and pull the ribs out, and they would just pop out of the meat in one piece. I always remember how satisfying, it sounds like I'm a serial killer, but so satisfying just pulling the spine out, and all the little ribs would just pop, 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 and you'd pull it out in one piece, and then that bottom piece would be just all meat and scales on the bottom, or skin.
Yeah.
And I remember we'd catch a few of those. We'd have them on a piece of pine, like a branch. We'd have a few, 10 to 12 inch browns or rainbows or whatever. And I remember doing that with my dad for years. And I haven't done it in a few years myself. We've kind of got away from stream trout fishing, but we should do that again this year, Andrew. Do it in the spring, because I absolutely love it. I hate the mosquitoes, but fish were, and you oftentimes would pick some fiddleheads when you're up there and have a really nice earthy meal. It would be like, you've got that earthy fiddleheads and some nice browns. Oh, that's like just true Ontario delicacy.
Just completely foraged, living off the land.
Yep.
There's some good stuff. I've tried a lot. I was really into like survival stuff for a while. And so I tried a lot of like, seeing when I could get food and stuff like that and forage. So I've tried a few things. There's a lot out there. Even like young bulrushes in like early spring, they can be like delicious, or like leeks and stuff like that almost. And they pull out with a squeak and you chop it up. Oh, delicious. Now going into something, this is something that I told Jesse to put in this episode. I'm like, all right, I need to ask Len this. Have you ever had ceviche?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah?
Great.
So have you done it with freshwater fish? And ceviche isn't raw. It's
technically not. It's kind of cured, but I have done it. I did a post like a couple of years ago where I did some freshwater sushi. The only thing you got to do with it before you do that is freeze the meat. You should be freezing it for a couple of days, or not, to kill the parasites if there are any found in the fish. You just got to freeze it first. And then it's also easy to work with when you take it out and it's thawing. It's about half thawed, and it will stay firm when you're trying to cut it into your little cubes to make. We did do poke bowls too, rainbow trout poke bowls. Those are awesome as well.
So with the ceviche, like how did you prepare it, and what species would you recommend to use? Like I'm sure some would probably be better in it than others. Like I'm not, a carp ceviche doesn't sound too appetizing to me. Just because it's doable doesn't mean we should.
I would say stick to your trouts, and your salmon is obviously going to be really good. I've seen it done with walleye. I haven't seen bass or pike, but I would do it with walleye or the trouts or salmons is probably your best bet for best taste. I did it personally with rainbow trout, and it was really good. And then another thing I'll talk to you about is, it's kind of on the same topic, gravlax, which is like lox. You ever get those bagels with cream cheese and there's a bunch of salmon on it with onions and capers and stuff? So that's basically gravlax. It's like a cured form of salmon or trout. So I also did that. I have a recipe here. It's really easy. Even you can do it, Andrew.
Perfect. That means anyone can.
Yeah, it's super easy, and it make you look like you know what you're doing, and it'll be impressive to the missus or whoever you're trying to impress.
Jesse.
Yeah, it's super simple. So you can do it with store-bought as well too to try it out, but I would just catch and fish. That's me.
I mean, we are a fishing podcast, so let's probably endorse the fact we cut it ourselves.
Hopefully people can be doing that. To get like a nice fillet, you know those big fillets you see at the grocery store, they're whatever, they're huge. So about half of that,
salmon Costco ones.
Yeah, so about half of that this recipe is good for. You can just scale up the recipe. So you do 1 cup of brown sugar, 1 cup of salt, like a coarser salt, and then I would zest an orange, a lemon, and a lime into that. Mix it all up, have a good mixture, and you put down your cling wrap. I suggest scaling the fish first. It'll help penetrate from the underside. So then you put down a handful of this in the fish shape, pat it all down, put the piece of the fillet on, and then cover the top with the rest. So all of it is kind of encased in your mixture. Wrap it tightly in your cling wrap, put it in the fridge, and you got to put it in like a tray or something. And you're going to put a plate or something over top with a weight, like a heavy can of beans or something, some type of weight on top that's going to help push out the liquid, and then leave it in your fridge for 36 to 48 hours. 36 it'll be a little bit more tacky, a little bit less cured, which is where I like to do it, but some people like it a little bit more, just to be sure. And it's going to drain the liquid out. Flip it over maybe once during this process and put the weight back on it. And then you're going to remove the fillet, wash it, pat it dry, and then you can cut on an angle. Start cutting out your thin slices, and you can just put that right on your bagel.
Yeah, cross grain cut like sushi, right? So it stays together. Yeah,
exactly. You already know.
That sounds good.
It's super easy to do. I've done it a few times, and it always comes out well. People are kind of amazed that you can create something like that.
That's awesome. Do you have any other favorite recipes or ways to eat fish that you like?
Lately, I've been into the skin on and searing them hot and actually getting a good crisp on them and eating crispy skin. That's where a lot of the nutrients and getting all your fatty omega-6s and 3s in there. So
omegas 1 through 17 are all in the skin.
All of them. Yeah.
What happens if you like bones? Like when you get bones in your fish? I know some people, they don't like bones in their chicken. I'm like, that's where the flavor comes from. But like bones in fish, I get. I'm not a fan of it. I prefer a boneless fillet over a full fish whenever possible, personally. But are there any like pet peeves that you have with,
obviously
bones in it?
Obviously, it's a turnoff to anyone, especially people who don't really like fish or who are hesitant about trying fish. As soon as they get a bone, the whole thing is riddled with bones, so they can't eat any more of it. But my wife's the first one to call me out if there's a bone, if she finds a bone or something. So I'll tell you a little story. One time I was eating fish that I cleaned, and I got a bone, and it's stuck in the roof of my mouth. And she was like around the corner, so I was like, like yelling, because I couldn't close my mouth because the bone was stuck in the roof of my mouth, and she had to come and like pick it out of my mouth.
Did she use her good tweezers for that?
She actually just stuck her hand in there. But after she figured out what I was trying to say, and she like reached in and grabbed the bone. So I kind of threw out the rest of that fish, but
it's like finding a hair in your food. You're like, nope,
Yeah.
can't eat it now.
yes, it's the whole thing is wrecked.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm happy to say I haven't had a bone in one of my fillets. Now I'm excluding pike. I think I've been boneless on pike fillets for the past 4 years, but for everything else, it's probably been about 10 years since I've had a bone in, a perch, walleye, bass, anything like that with basic bone structure. Trout, I haven't had any bones in those fillets for a number of years. I will say that. But so it's nice when I go, like when I cook food, let's say I bring friends to the cottage or something, and I'm like, I'm guaranteeing at least 1 or 2 fish fries this week. I'll catch the fish, I'll clean it, I fry it up, I cook it, I do everything. And you just get to enjoy a big fish fry. Like I'm talking plates full of it. And that's what I like to be able to provide when I have, camping with friends or at the cottage with friends. That's what I want to do. It also gives me an excuse to go fishing a lot when I'm there, but that's my purpose for going. But people will be like, oh, they're kind of humming and hawing, and I pride myself, and I think it is very important that, when you're learning, work hard to make sure that fillet is boneless. And I'm constantly looking to improve my technique. Like I said, with pike, I've tried a variety of different ways, things that my dad has come up with, that I've come up with, watching videos on YouTube. I've tried the 5 fillet method. I do the same thing you do now, getting that 1 full fillet. And now, yeah, that's probably the hardest method. Not to say that it's really any harder than any other fillet method. It's just different than what we're used to. Because everyone else, you grow up, filleting your first walleye was tough, or your first perch, whatever it was. That was hard. You probably had bones in it. The same process is going to come with pike, but that's when I've been really working on hard to get nailed down, because it's very rewarding. You get a lot of really good meat, and yeah, it's a slightly different fillet method, but I think it's worth it to learn, because when you have boneless fillets, you can be like the guy that everyone looks up to. It's bragging rights, and you can do that.
And I think too, pike's such an underrated species to eat. We've been eating pike a long time. A lot of people always like, oh, you eat pike, but it's where we live in zone 17, pike season is open year round because it's mostly musky lakes. So they don't care about the pike. It's open year round. You can fish all year, even when they're spawning. They don't care, because these pike are kind of invading the musky lake. So me and Andrew, when we fish these lakes that we musky fish in, if we catch a pike, we're like, I don't care, we're keeping it. Andrew knows how to fillet it. I'll let him fillet it. But every pike out of those lakes, it means better chance for the muskies that we like fishing for. It sounds kind of cruel, but that's the way it is. So keep these delicious fish, especially in zone 17. No, if I see you with a whole stringer of pike in zone 17, you're going to see a big thumbs up coming from me. If I see 6 bass, thumbs down. Just kidding. You can keep your limit. That's your fishing. What is it?
It's your right.
Well,
You're right. Yeah.
It's your privilege of having a fishing license.
Privilege.
It's not.
Before we go too far down the rabbit hole of our personal opinion on possession limits, we're going to move on to some listener questions. We've had, I think we covered a lot of them, but we do have a few more. So if your question isn't picked when you asked it, even I submitted one, is about ceviche, and we talked about it. So we're not going to ask that question.
Andrew submitted a question to his own podcast.
to his own podcast.
I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to ask about it.
Yeah.
I had it written down, so
good.
It does come up a lot. I've served it at one of my kitchen takeovers that I do here in Sudbury. If you're ever in Sudbury, great bar to go to. I'll just shameless plug for them.
Yeah.
Nowhere Public House. They have a amazing selection of Ontario craft beers and great food. The owners are excellent people, and the food is awesome. And they've let me run amok in their kitchen a few times for private events and takeovers. So thanks to them too.
We actually didn't talk about the recipe at all, but just kind of a basic ceviche recipe. Do you have one? How do you kind of prepare ceviche? It's filleted boneless. You cube up the meat, and then what?
After you freeze it, cube it up, and it's mostly done with lime, cilantro, red onions, bell peppers, tomatoes. The key with it is you want to have everything cut to the same size. So whatever size you're cutting your cubes, cut your onions, cut your jalapenos. Cut everything to the same size, and that's just going to give you much better presentation, and it's also easier to scoop with the chips or whatever you're eating.
And would that be like 1 centimeter cubes? I say centimeters because they're Canadian, but like 3/16 by 3/16 or whatever.
Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. As you can go as small or as big as you want to do it, but the small, yeah, about a centimeter is perfect size. It's good for scooping, and it's not so small that you're probably going to cut your fingers trying to look fancy, but somewhere in that neighborhood, yeah. Have you ever tried it? Have you ever done it?
I haven't. No, that's why I wanted to ask questions. It really interests me. I really want to try it, but I have been nervous about doing it because I am concerned. But I'm looking, guys, they saltwater fish and they do it right away. They slice it up and they say that the citrus in it, the acid in the citrus, is actually will kill the parasites and will cure it and stuff like that too.
I think it's slightly different with saltwater fish that you can actually eat them raw, like right away. Whereas freshwater fish, I'm not going to say always have parasites, but there's always a chance.
There's so little chance they don't. It's not worth the risk.
Yeah, so just freeze it first and don't be scared. Just go for it. It's gonna be you're gonna like it.
Cool. Yeah, I'll make Jesse try it too. He's like,
He'll make me try it first. Wait 4 hours, see how. And I just like to add right now, if you are on Instagram or social media, check out Len's Instagram account, which I'm going to put down in the show notes. We follow his Instagram account, and every few days, some awesome post comes up of him making the most ridiculous food out in the middle of nowhere. He'll be on a frozen lake making like brown trout tacos or like just the most random stuff. I'm like, when we cook fish, it's like bare bones fish. It's like, beer batter fish. It's like Len is making this stuff that looks like it's like from a 5-star restaurant out in the middle of nowhere, and it's all like insane stuff. So do yourself a favor, and even if you suck at cooking fish like me, look at this stuff, because it gives me hope one day that I'll be able to actually fillet fish.
Get some inspiration from him for like cooking ideas. I'm trying to do more because I've definitely fallen into the habit of I prepare fish 2 ways, and I want to try different things. I really want to do more with it. So having content like yours out there is a big help.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. But I wish it was every couple of days. I don't get to fish that often. Don't believe what Instagram shows you. I have a day job that keeps me from doing that, and a lot of family here. So
are you saying you're an average angler? Wow. Just like 98%.
How dare you be on brand?
Yes, I know. I get out an average amount of times is the issue.
Yeah. Hey, so do we. And guaranteed 98% of people listening to this podcast are in the same. They're in the same.
Oh, for sure.
So we do have a lot of questions from listeners. Now, I did put this question up on Patreon first. So basically, if you are a Patreon member, if you're a supporting member, or if you're just on our Patreon, you can join as a free member too. You get first pick. I'm going to pick from those questions first, because these are the people that support us, especially the supporting members. And then we're going to go after to Instagram and pick some of those. But if you haven't joined our Patreon to support the show so we can keep on going, help us cover the costs, make sure you check that out. The link's below. We have some questions here. I know we kind of covered some of them, but I thought we could answer these in like 30 seconds or less. They don't have to be big explanations. All right. So on Patreon, we actually have Tim asked this question. We already answered this, but we could go just to repetition for emphasis. He says, does bleeding a fish make a difference in taste?
100% it does. For presentation and taste, I think it's also going to get rid of any toxins. Sometimes people say toxins or heavy metals, whatnot, that maybe the fish has absorbed.
All right, here's a good question from Slap That Bass. I want to say bass, but I know it's bass. He says, what is the worst injuries you have had or seen while filleting fish?
I got a good one.
He holds up his hand. There's 3 fingers missing.
No, I got a good one. I was doing a shoot with Legend Boats, making a little video. We went out, crushed walleye, and then I said I would do a shore lunch as part of it. We started cooking, and I did a whole fillet, like a whole walleye fried, but I also made chips, and like homemade chips. I brought a mandolin and everything out into the bush, and I was hitting the potatoes on the mandolin, and I took a chunk of my thumb off. and he was like zoomed in, like getting the B-roll of the potatoes falling through, and he just sees like you just see the chunk go through, and you just hear me like, oh shit, and like gushing blood. And then I took a big time chunk out of it, so I just taped it up and electrical taped it. And then if you watch that video, like it's in one of my Instagram videos, you can see me like presenting the fish, and I have a big thumb like full of like tape and Kleenexes, whatever we can find. At the end of the video,
he's like, thumbs up.
Don't use like the mandolins. They come with like a little thing to help you guide. Yeah. Use them for sure.
Yeah. Don't throw it out like the rest of us.
I was actually worried. My next door neighbor is a doctor. So I went over there and got him. Like he scrubbed in and checked it out. He's like, I don't think you need stitches, but it was bad. Like my piece of my thumb was missing.
He's like, but you deep fry that and make sure you pat it down, and it's good.
The food was awesome, so it was worth it.
All right, here's a good question from Tyler on Patreon. He says, what's the best eating size for different common species? And then he gives examples: panfish, bass, pike, salmon, etc.
That's a good question.
That's a good question, yeah.
Well, now for walleye, in our zone, we can't keep anything over 18 inches, which is pretty much the perfect size anyways. I'd say pike is like 5, 6, 7 pounds. You want something big enough, you can get the Y bone. Trout, 2, 3, 4 pound rainbow is going to be the best, other than like a 10-pound rainbow around here. The smaller trout are obviously tastier. Same with salmon. All those mid-sized fish are usually your best. The longer they're alive, the more stuff they've collected over the years swimming around.
And bass isn't something that, like, I'm sure people in the States, they've heard me mention a few times that I've filleted and eaten bass. They're probably, rolling their eyes, like, how could you eat the game fish? It's like
smallmouth is really good.
Yeah, like I prefer to eat like a perch, a walleye, a pike over bass any day, but sometimes all I can catch on that trip is bass, and I want a shore lunch, so I eat bass. I know for ourselves, like because they're bass we don't want to keep ones that are overly big for two reasons. One, they don't taste as good, and two, we want to leave this big spawners in the lake, right? So we usually keep a cap for ourselves, like 1.5 pounds, like under 2 pounds for bass is all we'll keep. But usually, like, the 1.25 pounds, 1.5 pounds is like super easy to flay. You still get enough meat off of it, but it doesn't taste super.
And once the bass gets so big, it's so hard to cut through the rib bones. They're so hardy, it's crazy. They'll dull your knife like so fast with the big scales and the rib bones. So it's not even worth keeping them.
And even the bigger ones too, you get it so thick of a fillet off of it that
you have to cut it in
cook
half.
It evenly through. You got to slice it through again.
Yeah,
I do that with when we go for channel cats. I'll trim the fillet right in half lengthwise too, just so that it'll fry up properly.
All right, here's a good question from Evan. He says, what is an uncommon fish to eat but tastes amazing?
Uncommon fish.
Chub.
Chub, yeah, probably.
I'd say channel catfish. Like in Ontario.
Yeah, I would go with that too.
Yeah, such a good. That was actually one of my favorite things that Andrew made, was the Cajun channel catfish.
Yeah, they're kind of looked down upon as a rough species, but if you get the right size one, they are excellent to eat.
And they're not even bottom feeders. Like, they're not like a carp. They actively hunt. They're opportunistic, but so are pike. So are walleye. If they see a dead thing floating by, they eat it. So they eat pretty much the exact same stuff that our other big game species, predatory fish go after.
And this was the lake that we caught channel catfish on musky lures. Like, they are literally predators. Like, it was insane. I was fishing a bucktail, felt a big crush, set the hook. This fish is like, bulldog under the boat. I'm pulling it up, comes up. It's a huge channel cat. I'm like, and it had literally just the blade hanging out of its mouth. Like, the whole bucktail was in its mouth.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Didn't you catch it on a whopper plopper too?
I caught 3 on a whopper popper and one.
That's insane.
I had one follow a buzzbait and another one follow another bucktail on that trip. I didn't catch them, but they followed it right in. Like.
Oh yeah. In that system, like, if you get a follow when you're musky fishing, 8 times out of 10, it's a channel catfish. That's insane. Don't ask where it is, but we're going back there. All right, here's another question. This is from I Catch Dinks. He says, what's the best fish to cook up for people that don't like fish?
I Catch Dinks too. I would say walleye. You can't go wrong. It's so mild tasting. You're going to get the bones out. It's going to be easy to fillet. And if you're going to introduce someone to that, I think walleye is the easy winner.
I would say crappie is also like very mild, I find.
Yeah, they're just harder to come by around here.
Yeah.
Here's a good question. This is going to be the last question. Is from Taylor. He says, is it true you can pickle pike to get rid of the bones?
I did read that when I was doing some research, that it will just dissolve in the vinegar. Or I think they'll make them a lot more tender where you can just kind of bite through them. But Google said it was a thing. I've never pickled pike myself. I've seen it. I've seen the recipes and researched it, but I've never actually done it. But it seems like it would work in theory.
We should try that, Andrew.
Yeah, well, Jesse's into pickling stuff.
I pickle stuff. Like, I don't pickle fish, but I pickle like eggs and jalapenos. But, I remember my grandpa telling me they used to go, this is back in the old days, they used to spear suckers.
Yeah, people do that, pickling
and
suckers.
They'd fillet them up and they'd pickle them and the bones would just dissolve, right? You go to the grocery store, you'll see pickled herring and stuff in the jars. It looks disgusting. Like, I don't think I'd want to do it myself, but that would be cool though. If you wanted to try something cool, we could do ceviche and pickle up a pike.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah. You get a pike, you fillet it and just wrap it around in a big, loop of coil of meat, stick it in a jar, stick a bunch of onions in. So good. And one lucky winner will win that jar. Just kidding.
One last question I had was, have you ever fried up the perch roe? I've heard that you just batter it up and you fry up the big sack of perch roe, and apparently it's delicious.
I've done walleye roe.
Yeah?
And it is pretty good once you deep fry. Anything's good deep fried, so.
Mm-hmm. What's the consistency like when you bite into it though? For me, my fear is fruit gusher, and I don't want that.
No, it's not that like that. It's kind of firm. It kind of firms up. It's definitely not gusherish. I think you'd like it. You'd be willing to try it, but give it a little batter and fry it, and it'll get firm. It's kind of just like eating the meat, eating the flesh.
And would you recommend just like a light flour and salt, pepper, like some garlic, whatever, or like a
you don't have to go crazy on it because it's usually you don't get much, right? But I didn't eat a lot of it. I had a couple bites and I was like, just to say I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is good. It's not you're not going to spit it out.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. So now I will say I will try it. We really appreciate having you on, Len. I've learned a lot from this podcast. Is there any takeaways that come to your mind, Jesse, that you're going to try and do, or besides pickling pike?
Honestly, I'd say I'm just excited for 2025 because, like you said, me and Andrew, we don't eat fish a lot. I'd say we only eat fish. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times that we eat fish every year. That being said, when we do eat fish, me and Andrew usually cook it one of two ways. So I'm excited for Andrew and myself to try, and mostly Andrew do it and I get to eat it, but I'm excited to try some new ways. I'd say for beginners who haven't ever kept a fish before, buy yourself a nice fillet knife. Maybe if you win those tickets to CanCast that we're giving away, you can get a killer deal on a Bubba fillet knife at CanCast and learn how to fillet fish properly. And I'm going to have to practice myself because I'm not the best at filleting. I'm okay at it if it's like walleye or like trout, but anything complicated like pike, Andrew's way better than me, so I just let him do it. And I should really just be like, you know what, I'm gonna do this and get better at it. But I think this year my goal is to learn how to fillet pike. That's my goal this year. Yeah.
Right on. Well, like I said, you're gonna butcher the first couple of them, but there's only one way to get better, and that's practicing. So
well, I butcher them anyway, so it's only up from here. I was gonna ask, Len, are you gonna be at CanCast this year?
I am going to be at CanCast.
Awesome.
I'm excited. I've seen the hype online. I've never been in person, and I'm going to make it down there this year in the St. Croix booth with Bob and the boys, and hopefully chatting to a bunch of your listeners and picking up a bunch of gear.
If you see Len at CanCast, go up, say hi to him, tell him that you know the Average Ontario Anglers and you loved his episode.
Yeah, that'd be
and
awesome.
we'll obviously see you there too, Len. And I look forward to meeting you in person. I know for me, for this episode, my big takeaway is freezing fish in solid ice, like fish fillets in solid ice. That is an awesome tip that I will make use of. That's fantastic.
That'll definitely help in preserving them, especially for getting them in the freezer. They'll be good in a year, so definitely do that.
Yeah, I'd stored a bunch of pike from this previous spring, like winter into early summer. because I wanted to have enough meat and try like a whole bunch of beer batters and go to a buddy's place. And like we had a few families over. We just did a huge fish fry, trying a bunch of different beer batters to see what our favorite one was. So that was something that I did encounter. Was there was some freezer burn in some of the older ones, and I wish I would have known that little tip earlier. So I will make use of it for sure. We do want to give a huge thank you to all of our listeners who are tuning in every week, even in the middle of winter now. You're still listening, and that's because as real fishermen, as average anglers, whatever, but as fishermen, we just want to get back on the water, whether it's hard ice or open water. We want to get back out there and we want to learn more. So we thank you for listening. Feel free to, and please, we encourage you to please leave a message, leave a review, and rate the podcast as well. That helps us move up in the rankings, which in turn helps us to be able to offer some awesome giveaways. Like I said, we have our CanCast tickets that we're giving away, and we'll have a few to give away going forward until the event. So be sure to have your ballot in for those. And especially thank you to all our Patreon members who help make this show possible to be able to continue to afford it, and to put it simply. But before we end the episode, as tradition states, we have a quote of the week. And to handle that is our guest, Len.
Yeah, I got a good one that really pertains to this podcast. It's okay to eat fish because they don't have any feelings. And that's from the late, great Kurt Cobain.